Hello, I'm Bob Orr, and welcome to Washington Unplugged. Today marks the deadline for withdrawal of U.S. troops from major Iraqi cities, and Iraqis are said to be celebrating in the streets. Lara Logan is there and gave us an update this morning from Baghdad. Take a look.
There was a mood of celebration in much of the Iraqi capital today as people here marked the withdrawal of U.S. troops from Iraqi towns and cities with a national holiday. Iraq's Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki reveled in the moment, presiding over a military parade which was a first for the new Iraqi Army, Navy and Air Force. The parade took place in the center of Baghdad, where Saddam Hussein's military used to perform to send a message to the world about Iraqi military power. This was a very different kind of parade. It was much smaller, but it was nevertheless a show of force from Iraq's government that was meant to send a message of reassurance to the Iraqi people that Iraqi forces are ready to handle security in the cities and the towns, and that they can do this on their own. U.S. commanders have said it's time. The Iraqi forces are ready and the Iraqi people are ready. There is no question that many Iraqis are tired of being occupied, but there is great trepidation and fear about what will follow.
Lara Logan reporting today from Baghdad. Now, earlier today, I asked the Iraqi ambassador to the United States, Samir Shakir Sumaida'ie, what the mood was like in his country.
Pure delight, jubilation, people are happy, parties in the streets, people recognize this as a milestone in the progress of Iraq towards normality and sovereignty.
I think there were some doubts, widespread doubts, that this day would ever come.
Well, it was always going to come. It was only a matter of when, not a matter of if.
There are some parts of Iraq, though, that remain quite unstable. There has been a little uptick in violence lately. I think I read somewhere 250 people hurt recently in bombings and attacks. Do you think the handover of the cities will have an impact on the violence?
Not directly. I'll explain this. We had an uptick in violence in April, which was the anniversary of the fall of the regime. And we also expected another sort of peaking in this month when the American forces were expected to leave the cities. This is more of a statement intended for the media rather than for any actual military or political results. The insurgents, the terrorists, the people who are trying to destabilize the regime have in fact been defeated. But they are trying to say, we're still here, we can still inflict pain. And if you only watch the choice of targets, they're usually soft targets, and we believe these will eventually die out.
Isn't it reasonable, though, to expect that the insurgents and some of their sympathizers will want to test the resolve, want to test the preparedness?
Well, you see, if this was a sudden change, yes, but we have been preparing for this for months. The Iraqi security forces have, in fact, been in the lead for the last few months. It was a very gradual development, a gradual buildup of our capacity and a gradual withdrawal of American troops. In the last 2-3 weeks, there were very few American troops in the cities. This line in the sand, if you like, was determined when we negotiated the SOFA as a fixed date. But we've been moving towards it ever since then.
Let me ask you about Mosul. There's been a particular concern about Mosul. There are elements of al-Qaeda still there, insurgents still there. Why not carve that out as an exception and allow U.S. troops to maintain a security presence there?
Well, we still believe we can hack it. We still believe we can do it. The Iraqi security forces appear to be confident. I know that the Minister of Defense has made statements to this effect, and the Minister of Interior. If things call for it, there is a provision in the Status of Forces Agreement which allows the Iraqi government to ask for help. But I don't think this would be necessary.
What about the influence of Iran? There's some concern that Iran will exert an extra influence over the parliamentary government of Iraq. What can you tell us about what's happening there?
Well, the Iranian government has its hands full at the moment, and we believe that they understand that Iraqis will not tolerate interference. Iraqis have made it very clear to the Iranians in so many different ways. and some of those ways explicitly face to face, that we like to have a good neighborly and productive relationship, but we will insist on them not interfering, and we have no interest in interfering in their affairs either.
So to critics that say this is an invitation now for Iran to meddle,
they're wrong. Whether Iran will meddle or not meddle will be a function of how strong our own institutions are. Really, the only defense against foreign powers meddling is to strengthen our own institutions, and that's what we are doing every day.
Now, U.S. troops will remain in the country. What is being done to guarantee their safety and protection? Because the role has somewhat been reversed now. They're in a second position. And in traveling around, how do we guarantee that those folks are safe?
Well, there are two guarantees. One, their own strength, which is not inconsiderable. I mean, there are still a large number of troops with considerable military clout. And the other is the attitude of the population towards them. I think on both counts, they should be very safe and secure.
We're hearing some anecdotal reports that journalists are having some movements restricted, some access restricted. Is that a concern we should have?
Well, this is a tension that will continue for a while. Our Constitution makes it very clear that freedom of the press, freedom of expression is a pillar of our new democracy. But this pillar will be tested, I'm sure. It's a learning process. Democracy is not a switch that you flip and you have democracy. We are in a process that is progressive every day. Now, we must remember in the wider, we must frame this question in the right way. Since the change of regime, the number of TV channels and newspapers and other media has mushroomed. We have large numbers, and they are largely free. Many of them are critical of the government. The press in Iraq is a beacon of freedom, but there will be instances, there will be complaints, there will be situations where an official will try to hamper their work. These will happen, but the protection in the Constitution and the reality on the ground and the enthusiasm of our journalists have no bounds.
And there's still some serious sectarian differences in the country. There are people who feel still disenfranchised under the government that's being organized and generated there. How much progress is being made in bringing everybody together in a government that they can all agree with, that they can all support?
Well, huge progress. If you put it again in context, there is hardly any sectarian violence. 2 years ago, we had daily 40, 50, 60 bodies in the street every day in Baghdad. Now, this is a thing of the past. And if you compare us with countries like Northern Ireland, for example, who've had a history of sectarian violence, we've made huge progress in a very short time. Now, first, but there are wounds and there are grievances which will take time to heal. But in terms of progress, we made huge progress, and I believe in the last elections in January, the Iraqi people across the country, in the south, in the north, in the west, showed their distaste to sectarianism and punished the political parties who peddle sectarianism for their power.
Mr. Ambassador, thanks for coming in today.
It's a pleasure.
But John Hanna of the Washington Institute for Near East Policy is not so sure the U.S. job in Iraq is done. And here's what he told us a short time ago.
Bob, I think the security situation is tenuous, but I think it's much better, clearly, than it's been the last 2 years. But there's an awful lot of work that needs to still be done on the political and economic side. And I think the U.S. still has a major role to play there in getting Iraq over the tipping point to a point where some kind of reasonable, successful, democratic Iraq looks almost irreversible.
Let's start with security. In the past week, 250 people killed in bombings and shootings in Iraq, and 10 today in Kirkuk. Is this an invitation, the handover, is it an invitation to bad people to come in to cause more trouble?
I think I'd take the judgment of our commander on the ground, General Odierno, on this, that in fact the bad guys have been looking for opportunities surrounding this handover to embarrass the United States, embarrass the Iraqi security forces, and try and gain some advantage again.
The government there is still very, very tenuous. It hasn't been fully formed. And now we hear reports of Iran trying to have great effect there. How big of a problem is Iran?
I think the Iranians are a tremendous strategic problem. They're right next door. They're not going away. Their population's about twice as big as Iraq's with a much larger economy. So their influence is going to be there no matter what. The question is for good or for evil. At the moment, I think the Iranians are playing both sides of the street. One positive effect of, I think, the current turmoil in Iran is it makes it much more difficult for the Islamic Republic to focus on fomenting trouble across its borders and focusing far more on trying to consolidate its own hold on power inside of Iran.
Your former boss, Vice President Cheney, has been very critical of this. He says a lot of good can be undone. Do you think that's true?
I do think there's clearly a risk that there's no doubt that these gains that we've seen in Iraq, which are very real, particularly on the security front, could be reversible. We've got to be very careful here, which is why I do have some concerns that the Obama administration is much more focused on simply getting out of Iraq and turning our backs on the problem there, rather than figuring out a way how, at a political and economic level, the United States stays engaged, even as we're withdrawing our forces, to try and ensure that there's some amount of irreversibility to the success of a stable, more prosperous, more decently governed Iraq.
Do you think the Obama administration can still claim at some point a diplomatic or political victory here?
I think there's no question. I think Iraq is a tremendously important country in the Middle East. It's democratizing. It has the potential to be very rich from all those oil resources. And with the help of the United States, it's building an important and strong security force in that region. And I think if properly guided, if properly oriented toward the United States and some of our friends in the region rather than to the Iranians, that Iraq, in fact, could, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, people will look back and say, this is a real strategic asset for the United States.
So that's still achievable. Success is still achievable.
I'm convinced it is, Bob. That's my judgment.
All right, John Hanna from the Washington Institute. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks, Bob.
And thank you for watching Washington Unplugged today. Join us tomorrow again at 12:30 p.m. on CBSNews.com. I'm Bob Orr. Have a good day.